Welcome to Sweet Speak, where executives, innovators, and thought leaders break down the strategies shaping the future of business. I'm your host, JD Miller. Today, we're diving into the intersection of artificial intelligence and human resources. AI is transforming the way companies hire, retain, and develop talent. But what does that really mean for HR leaders and the workforce? Joining me is Lydia Wu, a visionary leader in HR tech and strategy. She's here to unpack how AI is redefining talent acquisition, employee experience, and the future of work. We'll discuss the opportunities AI presents, the ethical challenges it brings, and how HR professionals can harness its power while keeping the human in human resources. After the break, we'll dive on in. I'm excited today to have Lydia Wu with me. Lydia is one of the sharpest minds in HR and talent strategy. Now, if you're not familiar with Lydia, she is an expert on everything HR, but also AI, which is a huge part of Sweet Speak. So if you're curious about how AI is shaping up the way we hire, develop, and retain top talent, well, you are in the right place. Lydia is the founder and creator of Oops, Did I Think That Out Loud? By the way, I love that name. A partner at Advantage Associates, chairman of Data Driven, a people analytics company, former VP at MeBot, and a longtime executive at Panasonic, and stints at Deloitte and Accenture. She's built an incredible career leading talent development and transformation at some of the biggest names in the industry. She's all about using data, technology, smart strategies to create workplaces where people actually want to stay and grow. And she's got some strong takes on what HR leaders need to do now to keep up with the future work. So we're going to dive into AI's impact on hiring, skills-based talent management, and the big question everyone's asking: will AI replace recruiters? So buckle up. This is going to be a good one. Lydia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I might even just clip that initial intro piece out of it as my vocal resume going forward.
You can use my word, my voice. You don't have to credit me. Use it away. So let's dive on it. AI's role in HR and talent management. So I want to start off. How do you see AI transforming HR in 2025 and beyond? And I really want to know what's hype and what's reality.
Ooh, okay. That's probably a 2-hour conversation.
It's a loaded question to start off with.
It's a very loaded question, but let's get started. So I may piss off a few people listening to this, but based on my observation of the market right after when OpenAI kind of came out November of 2022 and sort of what's been happening since, I think we're going to see a couple things in 2025. Some of them are in HR's favor. Others are going to require HR to do a little more work. And I'm really excited to be here because you're one of those shows, if you will, that doesn't ignore HR. Because I think with the rise of AI, where the market is moving as fast as the enterprise solutions market is moving as fast as the actual buying customers, a lot of times people tend to ignore the conversation around HR. And I think that leads me to the first trend, which is how do HR stakeholders stay relevant in this conversation pertaining to AI? Because we still see a lot of fear in the market. We still see a lot of head in the sand moment of like, it's going to go away. If there's one thing anyone ever leave this episode with is that AI, unfortunately or fortunately, is not going away. It's not like the trend with mobile or with cloud that we've seen. It is going to become embedded in how we work and how we deal with our workforce and how we manage talent across the organization. Where I do think AI is going to be able to help HR is the elevation of HR, right? Because for the last 20, 30 years, most HR organizations have worked on this three-legged stool model, which is you have your centers of excellence, you have your business partners, you have an operational services arm, et cetera, et cetera. Except for some reason, we've all worked ourselves into a tizzy, and every one of us, as I joke, comes with 2 fire extinguishers attached because we're constantly putting out fires. And at the same time, we're constantly saying we want to be more strategic. So with that in mind, AI can actually elevate HR out of that admin and operations type of work without having to replace it with something else. Now, that's a good part. The part that's going to require a little bit more work, I think, is for HR leaders to answer. What are you going to do with all that time? HR budgets have been slashing over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. And that's primarily because technology is coming on and we haven't been able to answer the question of what else are we going to do with our time? How else are we going to provide value? And where is the new operating model that will allow HR to provide that level of value?
The fear initially in some industries is it's going to replace my job, right? Are you seeing AI replacing recruiters or HR professionals? How's it shifting the role today?
I don't think it's going to replace your job. So I'm going to answer this from a sort of evolutionary standpoint, and then we can go into sort of a macro standpoint and then zoom into HR. From an evolutionary standpoint, if you follow the leading AI researchers, they will basically tell you that genetically humans have evolved to have an advantage. Essentially, the information that is encoded in your DNA inherently gives you a leg up because machines have to learn that information from scratch, if you will. From a more zoomed in level, a lot of AI research is actually now focused on the person. So the black cab drivers in London, for example, for anyone who's been to London and ridden in a black cab, I'm sure you'll notice they don't follow a GPS because these guys have to pass one of the world's hardest exams called the knowledge, where they literally have to remember all the streets and alleyways in and around London. And what researchers are finding is that their posterior hippocampus, which is where we store our long-term memory, spatial awareness, all of that, is larger than the average human. And that oddly has intrigued AI researchers to understand how the human brains work in order to help develop AI technology to become more efficient. So all said and done, all trends are pointing to the fact that humans are still a very essential part of the equation. Now, zooming into what that means for the recruiting and talent teams, I think if the role is really repetitive, if you can document the task and you're just the human that's there repeating the task, then yeah, you are at higher risk of being replaced with AI because machines are really, really phenomenal at repeating something. However, if your role is to connect the dots, for example, understanding how someone with a marketing skill set could be a perfect fit in a finance role, or how a procurement person can be amazing in an HR department, that's the level of connection and understanding that requires so much context and experience the machines aren't quite there to do just yet.
AI and definitely some tech tools, as they're going through resumes and whatnot, have kind of proven to be biased over time. And it's the biases of those coding it. Now, hopefully HR can help that and clear some of that up. But how can AI help companies build a more diverse and inclusive workforce today?
For sure. I think it's not so much in the recruiting tool sets. It's more so in how you look at your data structure, your data architecture, and just the pipelining process before you start training the AI. Every time people tell me that AI is biased, I'm sitting there like, you realize it's just reflecting our biases back to us. And now we're seeing it in totality. We're like, OMG, this is not going to work for us. But it's really the historical human biases, if you will, that's folded into the equation and folded into the training. I think there's a few things immediately organizations can do. Number one is before you dump your data into any AI tool for training purposes or for anything along those lines, always make sure you do a data audit to peel out any data points that will potentially generate bias during training. The second thing I always recommend folks to do, and there are many companies and many individuals out there doing that, is make sure whatever vendor it is that you're using, especially when they promise that they're using AI for talent management, for performance management, for skills, et cetera, that vendor has gone through an independent audit and is willing to go through ongoing independent audits to make sure that their back end language model and their back-end tech stack isn't touching anything that could be generating potential biases. And the third thing I would say is whatever policy you have published in terms of reducing biases in the physical environment, meaning like whether it's like blind interviews, blind resume screenings, et cetera, ask your solution providers to do the same and implement that in the digital environment. So that way the checks and balances are still in place.
I want to discuss some practical AI implementation because you brought some good examples. What are some best real world use cases for AI in HR today?
So I think a couple of different things. The more practical ones I have seen is I always ask HR folks, like, what is the most painful thing you've had to do? And a lot of them are like, oh my God, Lydia, you don't understand. I had to export this giant Excel spreadsheet from this system. I can't make sense of it. The data is duplicated, et cetera. One of the best AI tools I've seen actually scrubs your data for you based on what it's noticed in the data pattern. And the best part is that it highlights the changes and it tells you why it made those changes. So not only are you getting a clean data set, but you're also seeing the logic that the model has gone through and cleaned the whole thing. And the tool itself dumps out the entire set of data afterwards. So you don't have necessarily any privacy concerns after that. The other thing that I've seen done really well in terms of applying AI to HR is, remember, for anyone who's in HR listening to this, I'm sure you've had to answer the same question, especially during periods like open enrollment, 10 times over. Like, how can I reset my password? Where is my benefit plan? What's changing? Why is it changing? And you just feel like this answering machine, basically, in a human form. I've seen AI doing a really good job of just putting that information with the employees so that you don't have to answer the initial level questions. You're just dealing with the tier 2 escalations. The other thing I've seen AI done really well is on the talent acquisition front. Now, depending on what technology we're looking at, the ability for AI to really help human sourcers and recruiters parse out information and just make a series of rapid decisions or recommend a series of rapid decisions is pretty phenomenal.
So what advice would you have for those HR leaders who want to start integrating HR but don't know where to begin? It's overwhelming. It's in the news. It's on shows like this all the time, and everybody feels that I talk to feels like they're behind, right? And they're overwhelmed. They don't know how to start. They don't know how to catch up. What advice do you give to those HR leaders who want to start integrating?
First, I would tell them, like, I hear you. I live in this world. I study this world pretty much 24/7. And sometimes I still feel the whiplash of what's happening. If you had asked me a year ago where I would expect the market to be today, all of that happened like 6 months ago. And where the market is today, I would have never predicted unless it was like 2, 3 years out. So it's actually practically led to me to say, like, I'm not going to forecast the market out for more than 18 months at a point now, because everything is rapidly moving and moving so quickly that we haven't seen this for decades at this point. I think for HR leaders who are like, yes, I need to do AI, I need to get into AI, back to the basics. That would be my very first and only tip. Go back to the basics, because you are still the function that deals with people in an organization. You are still the function that people look to when there's a lot of turbulence and there's a lot of change that's happening in the environment. So going back to the basics and understanding that you still need to provide that human touch and asking yourself the question, what am I trying to solve? What is that problem? Because the problem hasn't changed in our world, arguably, for a very long time. What are those problems? What are those high ticket items that will let the organization see value and drive business results and everything else? And then ask yourself the question, do you need AI to solve that problem? Because AI is still developing. We're still seeing a bit of a cost to value equation fluctuation. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, DeepSeek kind of proved out in terms of what we thought an AI model could be priced at versus what it could also be priced at. And we're seeing more of that coming out of countries like France with Le Chat by Mistral that just came out, I think, this week. So all said and done, it's about understanding, is AI the right solution for you at this moment in time for the challenge that you're looking to solve, instead of starting with AI, which is like the shiny object, and trying to forced play it into your ecosystem.
You've tackled what to do for it to work well. What are the biggest mistakes companies make when implementing AI in their hiring and talent processes?
It's the mistake companies have been making since I've entered the world of HR tech a while back, which is we assume that just by buying and plugging in the technology and saying go live button, everything will be fantastic and all of our lives' problems will be solved. That is unfortunately not the case. I think with AI, the lack of understanding of post-implementation support and ongoing monitoring is where I see most companies are starting to see sort of the not so great returns on AI investment. It's the appreciation that AI is still just a technology that you've plugged into the organization. You now need to maintain it. All of the integrations that sucked before is still going to suck, because even with agentic AI, you still need integrations for all of those orders to be executed by downstream functions. And on top of all that, it's HR not necessarily budgeting for the support and ongoing maintenance resources in the business case that I see backfiring way often than we should at this point.
So how can HR teams ensure, I want to get back to this bias and responsible use. So how can they ensure AI driven decisions remain ethical and unbiased? And again, I understand it's as good as the data you put in, right, is what it's going to give out, but it's also aggregating all this data everywhere. So you still have that eking in there.
Yeah. I think for me, it's putting the human at the center. A lot of the best practice organizations I've seen so far, they use AI to support the people, not to replace what the people do. So what that means is, let's say as a sourcer, you have AI recommending solutions for you, but you don't have AI making those decisions on your behalf. You're still sitting here going like, okay, I have, let's say 2,000 resumes. You've now given me these 200. What of this 200 or 20 do I actually want to look at? And maybe let me allocate a certain amount of my time to go back to the 1,800 or however many that were left out and just do a quick scan to see what we missed out. So there's still a layer of human check and balance that's required, I would say, at the last sort of 10, 15% of the journey that is supported by AI.
Everybody loves talking about regulations and compliance. So let's dive into that. What regulations or compliance issues should HR leaders be aware of when using HI in hiring performance management?
So I always look to Europe for better or worse when it comes to these types of regulations. And if you look at the EU AI Act that rolled out, I think earlier this year with different implementation timelines, one of what it comes down to is what I mentioned earlier, which is, are you letting the machines decide, or do you still have a human in the decision loop making that final decision? So that's one thing around it. The other thing I think HR leaders need to be aware of is the laws and compliance regulations around everything we've done historically hasn't changed. So it's making sure that your vendors also understand that just because we're now in the world of AI and doing things a lot faster, it doesn't mean that it's sort of the Wild West and we can do whatever we want. And the last thought I will leave with the audience pertaining to this question is actually something Keith Sonderling, the previous commissioner of the EEOC, shared, which is there really a difference in looking into the black box of technology and how data was processed to make decisions versus the black box of the human mind when it comes to making decisions and pertaining to bias? I've been noodling on that since I've heard it a year or so back at this point. But I think there is something to be said that with AI, you could almost make an argument that it is easier to detect bias because you can see the algorithm working, whereas in the human brain, it is a very literal black box.
It's not going to take your job. Okay, let's put that out.
It's not going to take your job. Definitely not going to take your job.
But what skills do you think HR leaders and professionals and business leaders need to thrive in an AI-driven workplace?
So I think there's a lot of practical skills in terms of understanding data, understanding technology, and just understanding the data speak. But if I were to sort of peel all of that back, because I think that's like take 8 hours a month and you can figure it out type of thing, two things come to mind. Number one is adaptability, and number two is focus. So when I say adaptability is because everything is changing so constantly that the historical way of how we looked at change management doesn't apply anymore, because the historical change management assumes that after a period of change, there's a period of stability, and then you go through another period of change. Now we're looking at waves that are like layered on top of each other for change management. So there's a lot of flexibility and adaptability from a soft skill set perspective that has to get embedded in how we do work. The second thing is focus, because to your point earlier, everything is happening everywhere at the same time, and you're getting news articles hitting you left, right, and center. So what I've seen the most successful business leaders do is that despite all of the things that are happening, keeping the focus on what your business goals are, keeping the focus on what you're trying to achieve, and just kind of plugging ahead, acknowledging everything that's happening around you, but not necessarily getting distracted by it.
how can we curb fears for our staff, right? And how should organizations prepare employees for AI adoption and automation in the workforce while still dealing with the emotions that are behind that?
For sure. I think we need to get deeper into that question, right? It's not really the fact that your staff don't want to use AI. Quite frankly, I'm sure if you do a survey right now, most of them will tell you how they're using AI in their personal lives.
Right.
The overcoming the fear of the staff, I would call it overcoming the fear of mistrust in an organization. Because if you look at the trust equation between organizations and their workforce, it's been eroding over time. Studies has proven that it's been eroding over time. Now you're going to layer a piece of technology where a human used to be. So of course, there's going to be some sentiments, especially given the macroeconomic environment that we're in right now. With that in mind, I think the challenge for HR team is not about adopting AI, but shifting the mindset to say, how do I build enough trust with my workforce? How do I get them to trust me that when I roll out this piece of technology, it is going to do what I say it will do, and it's not going to overstep the boundaries that I have already set on its behalf. So it's kind of rebuilding that level of trust back into the workforce, and that will organically lead to the workforce adopting AI and kind of embracing technology a lot better.
How can we use it to enhance employee engagement and retention instead of making workplaces feel robotic?
For sure. I think one of the best use cases I've seen is really that tier one support. If we want to get really specific into use cases. So a lot of times when I talk to total rewards leaders, head of benefits and everything else, I will always get the anecdotal stories of this employee has a huge medical issue and we couldn't get anyone to get back to him until 10 days later. And here's all the aftermath of him or her and their family has gone through. I've heard stories of like, hey, spouse is giving birth early and here's all of the other downstream impacts and we couldn't even get their leave of absence figured out in time, et cetera, and now they have to deal with us on top of a newborn. AI alleviates all of that, right? If you put yourself in the shoes of the employees for a moment, that's a really crappy experience at a moment that really matters in your life where your employee technically promised to be there for you, but they are not redeeming that part of the promise. So with AI, a lot of that interaction can be mitigated in terms of like, hey, how do I go on LA? Or hey, just put in my request for LA. System will take care of that for you. So that way, at least the request is logged, the date and time is logged. You're not relying on a person with probably 2,000 emails sitting in their inboxes to get back to you. So I think from an engagement point, that's definitely one of those critical factors. And from a retention standpoint, we've always known that the managers were the linchpin. We also know that we have put a lot of work on our managers over the years with HR going like, nope, not me, it's you, you do it. But the problem is the manager still has to manage a line of business. So with AI, and I think a lot of the talent management solutions I'm seeing out there, it's about how do you help that manager become a lot quicker, a lot more expedient at having those critical conversations and working with their people so they're not leaving due to that manager workforce relationship.
Final question, looking ahead, what's that one AI-driven HR trend that leaders just can't afford to ignore today?
I have two. They're kind of related.
Okay.
So I think first and foremost, you can't ignore AI. It's not going away. It is getting embedded in your tech stack left, right, and center. If you're using technology for HR today, there's a pretty high chance that your solution provider already kind of rolled out AI on your behalf, even if it is just on the back end to help their stack become more efficient. The related trend to that you absolutely cannot ignore is that HR people kind of have to be data people now. I know some are listening to this and kind of cringing silently at their desks, but data is the key to AI. Every AI company is effectively a data company at this point. And as HR, you don't need to understand everything there is about data, but you do need to understand some foundational elements of how do you structure your data, what data can be shared, what has to absolutely be redacted, what can be trained on, what is your primary key for all of your data sets, and then how do you want to structure your data sets so that when you ask an AI system, let's say a few months down the road, what is my talent pipeline, it can actually give you a response in return.
We've been trying to get you on for months, and I'm so glad we finally got you on. And as part of this, talk to me. What are you up to at Oops? Did I think that out loud?
So a couple of things that Oops, did I think that out loud? I am a evangelist for the disconnect that happens between the business side of the house and the HR side of the house, as well as between HR buyers and HR tech providers. So we're working on a couple different things. Number one, it's a weekly episode of AI for HR in under 90 seconds, where literally if you don't have time to do anything with AI, just spend 90 seconds a week and you'll be caught up on the latest of what's going on. The other thing that we're doing is we're still doing a lot of news articles and publishing through the LinkedIn channels, but more importantly, we've started a YouTube series called I Paid For It, so you don't have to, where we're live demoing a lot of the AI tools to really look at it from an HR practitioner lens to say, is this legit or is it BS?
Lydia, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again to Lydia for joining us. You can listen to past episodes and view past episodes of SweetSpeak on jamesdwayne.com. That's DWAYNE. You can also get copies of my book, Ringmaster of AI, SweetSpeak Conversations, at the website jamesdwayne.com. Thanks for listening.